SBO is the best.
Okay, let's lock in. So by the end of this video, you'll be able to name and locate the major bones that you need to know for this OCR GCSE course. You'll be able to explain the 6 functions of the skeleton. You'll be able to define a synovial joint and be able to identify the different types of synovial joints, and also be able to match the joints to the bones that are around the joints. We call these bones articulating bones. We're going to be able to describe the different movements that apply at different types of joints. And lastly, we're going to be able to talk about the roles of ligaments, cartilage, and tendons. Okay, now we're going to go through each bone you need to know, starting from the top to the bottom. So we'll start from the head and the spine, going down to the chest and shoulders, arm and legs, and then hips and legs before we finish up with the feet. So head and spine. At the head, we have your skull. So this is your cranium, which is your skull, and your cranium protects your brain. Next, you have vertebrae. So vertebrae are these individual bones that stack up to make your spine. So this massive long structure right here is your spine, and it's made up of individual vertebrae. So basically, vertebrae are just the bones that form the spine, and they're really important because they protect the spinal cord and they support your posture. Now at the chest, we have your ribs, which are these individual bones, and all of your ribs make up what we call your rib cage, which is this structure right here. That's your rib cage right there. So your ribs are really important because they protect your heart and your lungs. If you think about where your heart and your lungs are, your heart sits somewhere here and your lungs are in here. So your rib cage, your ribs are really important for protecting your heart and your lungs. Next, we have the sternum. The sternum is this bone in the middle here, your breastbone. That's your sternum, and it's where the ribs connect. Okay, then at the shoulder area, we have the clavicle. So you can see the clavicle is your collarbone, this bone that goes across right here. It's your clavicle. So just to make it more clear, we're going to shade it. The clavicle is this bone right here, and you have one on each side of the body. That's your clavicle. You can feel it right now. It's that long bone that sort of sits across your chest, at the top of your chest, like a bar. And then the other bone we have around the shoulder area is your scapula, which is your shoulder blade. Now let's move on to the hips, where we can find the pelvis. So the pelvis is found in this hip area, and it's a big structure that supports your upper body and protects your organs. So in a lot of sports like rugby, for example, your pelvis and your hips are very important for stability and for generating power. Now in your arms, there are 3 bones you need to know. This upper arm bone here is the humerus, which connects from the shoulder up here down to the elbow joint here. And then next we have the radius and the ulna in the lower arm. So the radius is the bone on thumb side. So you can see our thumb is here and the radius is on this side, and the ulna is on the other side, the little finger side. Now we go down here to the hands. So the hands, we can split it into 3 different layers, 3 different parts. That base part at the wrist area is the carpals, and then going up to the palm area in the middle, which is shaded in red, we have the metacarpals, and finally your fingertips, your finger bones are called the phalanges. So you can see they've been shaded here in green, red, yellow, which just so happens to be the Cameroon flag. So think about the Cameroon flag when you're thinking about the different sections of your hand. We have green in carpals, red in metacarpals, and yellow in phalanges. We also have a similar thing with the bones in the foot. We have green, red, yellow, that Cameroon flag again, and this time the green around the ankle heel area, we call that the tarsals. The red in the middle area, in the middle of the foot area, we call that metatarsals, and at the toes, the bones there are called the phalanges. Now for the bones in the legs, we have the femur, which is the biggest and the strongest bone, the tibia, which is in the lower leg, and that's your shin bone, and the fibula, which is also in the lower leg and it's thinner than the tibia and it's found on the outside of the lower leg. But we also have a little bone that sits at the front of the knee. So your kneecap bone is actually called the patella. So it's just a little structure that sits at the front there, and that's your kneecap. Okay, quick recap of everything we've spoken about so far. We've gone over the cranium, vertebrae, ribs, sternum, clavicle, scapula, pelvis, humerus, radius, ulna, carpals, metacarpals, phalanges, femur, patella, tibia, fibula, tarsals, metatarsals, and phalanges. So these are the bones you need to know. Now let's move on to the functions of the skeleton. So what does the skeleton actually do? So you need to understand that the skeleton is important for structure. So structure meaning that your skeleton is like a framework that holds you up. Without your bones, you would basically be like a pancake, like just a puddle on the floor. Next, we have posture. Posture means keeping the body in the correct position, so standing tall, shoulders back, spine aligned. Next, we have protection. Protection means protecting the vital organs. So, for example, the cranium protects the brain, the ribs and the sternum protects the heart and the lungs, your vertebrae protect your spinal cord, and the pelvis protects organs in the lower body. Next, we have movement. So bones don't just move by themselves. Movement happens because bones act like levers and muscles pull on the bones, and that allows for movement. Also because you have joints that help in that process as well. Next, we have blood cell production. Bones have something inside of them called bone marrow. Bone marrow. And bone marrow produces blood cells, like red blood cells, for example, which are really important for carrying oxygen around the body. Next, we have storage of minerals. Bones store minerals like calcium and phosphorus, which are really important in the body, and the body can release these minerals when needed to keep the body functioning properly. And they have a wide range of uses, such as in muscle contraction or to help your nerves function properly. So if you're not getting enough calcium in the long term, your bones can become weaker. And that's not something you want when you're doing really intense, high impact sports, for example. Okay, so those are the 6 functions of the skeleton. Now let's talk about synovial joint. So what's a synovial joint? Simply, a synovial joint is just a freely movable joint, because you do have other joints in your body that don't move and the bones are really fused together. But the way a synovial joint works is that you have one muscle, you have another muscle, they meet and they can allow movement, different types of movement in different directions depending on the type of joint. So let's look at an actual synovial joint diagram and see the different things that are in the joint. So in a synovial joint, we have a joint cavity which contains synovial fluid, and synovial fluid is really important because it helps to lubricate the joints so that the bones can move smoothly. We also have cartilage, which prevents the bones from rubbing against each other. We have the joint capsule, and we have ligaments. Ligaments connect bone to bone, connect bone to bone. So that's what ligaments do. And tendons connect muscle to bone. So if we were to imagine that we had a muscle somewhere up here, got a muscle right here. That muscle would be connected to this bone via a tendon. So let's just say this is our tendon. So that's what tendons do. They connect from muscle to bone. Meanwhile, ligaments connect from bone to bone. Okay, we are going to look at the different types of joints that you need to know. But first, let's see the different types of movements and their definition. Because after that, we're going to look at joints. But the important thing about those joints is that they only allow certain movements. So it's important to know the definitions of these different movements so that you can apply it to the different joints. So very straightforward: flexion, extension, abduction, adduction, rotation. Circumduction can be a bit tricky, but the way to think about circumduction is moving your limbs in a cone shape. So what I mean by cone shape, if we were to draw a little person right here, say you are about to bowl a cricket ball, right? You're a cricket bowler, you're about to bowl a ball. You're gonna bowl with this right hand. What motion does the right hand actually do? You could describe it as a cone motion, right? Because it goes in a circle like a cone. If you could just visualize it like this, because your hand sort of, your whole arm sort of goes in a cone motion like that to actually bowl the ball. And that motion creates an action in your shoulder, which we call circumduction. And that's where it combines all these different movements. It combines flexion, extension, abduction, and adduction. So circumduction can be a bit tricky, but once you visualize it as moving in a cone-like shape, then it becomes a lot easier. All right, now let's go on to look at the different types of joints. You have hinge joints and ball and socket joints. So for hinge joints, you can find that at the knee and the elbow, and they only allow flexion and extension, which means that you can only bend and extend. So for example, at the knee, you can only bend your knee or straighten your knee, and this is a movement that we do a lot in sports. So before you kick a football, you bend your knee to load up the kick, and then you extend your knee to actually kick. When you're squatting, you bend your knee when you're going down on the squat, and you extend your knee when you're coming up. And for at the elbow, when you're lifting a weight for a bicep curl, you're bending your elbow when you're coming up with the weight, and you're extending your elbow when you're bringing the weight back down. Now, for the ball and socket joints, these joints allow flexion, extension, rotation, abduction, adduction, circumduction, and they can be found at the shoulder and at the hip. Okay, let's break this down with examples. So, at the shoulder, an example of flexion could be lifting your arms up. So, right now, lift your arms in the air like you're about to block a netball shot or you're trying to block a basketball shot. That is flexion of the shoulder when you bring your arms forward and up like that. Extension at the shoulder is just the opposite. So you're bringing your arms backwards. Think about sprinting, right? Think about the arm action in sprinting and the way your arm has a phase where it drives back. That is extension at the shoulder, where you drive it back behind your body. Rotation at the shoulder, we can see that when you are throwing a baseball or a cricket ball, there's a lot of rotation at the shoulder because you're moving that shoulder joint around a fixed axis. Abduction at the shoulder is when you are bringing the arms towards the body. So in boxing, throwing a hook punch is abduction because you're bringing that shoulder towards the body, you're bringing the arms towards the body and across the body. Now, adduction is the opposite of that, is bringing the arms, bringing the upper arm and that shoulder away from the body. So you could even think about jumping jacks, right? What happens in jumping jacks? There's a phase where you actually take the arms away from the body. So that is adduction, and the movement happening at the shoulder is adduction. because you are adducting the arms at the shoulder. Lastly, we have circumduction. We briefly talked about this with the cricket bowling. So when you're bowling a cricket ball, your arms move in a cone shape, and that causes circumduction at the shoulder. Now at the hip, similar things. Hip flexion could be when you are driving in a sprint. Think about your hips during sprinting. You have two phases. You have the phase where you're actually driving your knee upwards. You're driving your knee upwards to be able to generate power. And then you have the extension phase. Hip extension could be also during a sprint where you're slamming your leg back into the ground and pushing off from the ground so that you can generate power for your sprint. Now, hip rotation, an example of hip rotation is opening up your hip to take a touch in football, for example. So if you watch Phil Foden, when he takes a touch, he can take a touch, open his hip, open his body, and turn. That is an example of hip rotation because he's opening up his hip, he's rotating his hip outwards to be able to turn. You can also rotate your hip inwards as well. So again, in football, when you're passing the ball, you might rotate your hip inwards because you're going through the ball. And sometimes your leg can even go across your body. So that's hip rotation, but inwardly. Now, hip abduction again is taking the leg away from the body, and this could be a kick. In MMA, sometimes fighters might kick, and during the kick, they're taking the legs away from the body, and that movement is hip abduction. Hip adduction is bringing the leg back towards the body. And for this, think about doing a side lunge, right? When you do a side lunge, you lunge out, so you extend, you abduct your leg outwards as you extend it out. And then when you're coming back up, you bring it back towards the body. That's adduction because you're bringing your leg back towards the body in the upward phase of a side lunge. Now, lastly, we have circumduction. Again, similar thing to what we talked about at the shoulder. Think about that cone-like movement at the hip. Okay, that's it for this video. As always, I would highly encourage you to do a lot and lots of practice with topics like this. It's all about repetition and answering questions so you get used to what you're going to be asked in the exam. So feel free to check out our website superpeonline.com for loads of exam questions to help you prepare and to ace your exams. See you in the next video.